just recently, he retires, and now he's doing what he ought to have done all along, be a Lafayette scholar. And he remembers enough French, you recall, to publish in 2006 a translation of Auguste Levasseur's Lafayette in America, 1824-1825, for 3 years. He spends time at the kitchen table on Saturdays and in the evenings translating this text. Let me tell you who deserves mention, and that's his wife, Marilyn. She permitted it. She's the one who needs consideration. And then, of course, there's the chief operating officer, Chuck Schwalm, who is just style personified. He reminds me of Ben Mankiewicz. But let's be truthful. The brains of that outfit is Bonnie Fritz. And let me mention Lafayette Trail to you and their website. Julian Isha and John Bessica, what a team. And I purloin ideas from that website, and it's interactive, and I'd recommend that you go to it. And let me talk to you about the Lafayette Alliance. Just a moment, we'll talk more, but we've been rumbling along for about 3 years now. And let me tell you, the person who makes everything work, you have just met, and that's Alex Hughes. Alex is responsible for the website and the blogs. Listen, when we were starting working on these blogs, I told Alex, I said, Alex, 180 seconds, 3 minutes is not much time to get content, to get an idea across. To which Alex replied, 3 minutes, nothing. You get it down to 60 seconds, and it really requires discipline of mind, and I have enjoyed doing that. And Alex Hughes really makes things work. Furthermore, our Vice President, Linda McMullen, talking about an engine of ideas. We appreciate her to no end. And I must mention to you, Jake Baer. Jake recently retired. He was known here in LaGrange buzzing around in his BMW with his oxygen cannula in place, and still he carried on. Really, Jake Baer was the nidus of the idea and the energy that began everything with the Lafayette Alliance. And I must tell you about Janice. Janice and I have been married now for coming on 44 years. Janice and I met in a cadaver group. You top that for a romantic encounter. She and I were both in medical school, and I looked up and I saw this attractive, intelligent, she was a chemistry major, and very talented young woman. She could play the piano and hit a high note. I was very methodic, married logic. It made sense to me. This was a go. And I told her that, and she wouldn't talk to me for a year. I do tell you that for another reason. There is a parallel in Lafayette's story, and see if you can pick it up in the narrative. In any event, Janice did finish 2 years of medical school. The hardest part, it was all easy after that, but she'd always wanted to teach, to be around young people. And I have always admired the courage that she had to go back and get her teaching degree. And she's been teaching young folks these many years, won yet another award last week for her teaching prowess. I want you to know how important she is to this work. Now, we have work to do. Let's talk Lafayette. The hardest questions are many times the simplest, but they're the most important to ask. So let me ask you this question. What good is it to study Lafayette? I mean, apart from the pleasure, apart from gratitude, loyalty, a swashbuckling good story, does it make life better having studied Lafayette? Does it make us see more clearly? Does it make us feel more acutely? Does it change our social, political, or moral attitudes? We're going to answer that question. And you understand that that's the same sort of question we ask about arts and about literature. And you could argue that there need not be a purpose, that we need not show relevance. But we Americans tend to be a practical people. We like to see purpose in what we do. Gordon Wood wrote a wonderful book years ago called The Idea of America, and he pointed that out. Here's the plan. Everybody ought to have a plan. First, we're going to talk about the three philosophies that permeated Lafayette's life. Second, we're going to talk about his defining moments. Third, Jean Piaget, Lawrence Kohlberg, and Northrop Frye and Lafayette. Fourth, Lafayette and LaGrange, Georgia. Fifth, the Lafayette Alliance, Pistons of Imagination, Bridging the Racial Divide, and Civic Renewal. And then we'll take two sidebars. What item of attire best identifies with Lafayette? And what do Lafayette enthusiasts call themselves? Then we'll have some book recommendations, and then we'll answer that question. So first, let's talk about the three philosophies that ruled Lafayette's life. Lafayette's motto was "Cour non," or why not? November 20th, 1776, Silas Deane, the not-so-secret agent, America's secret agent in Paris, had certified Baron de Kalb as a major general in the American Continental Army. At the same time, he had certified Lieutenant de Beaumartin as a major and aide-de-camp to Baron de Kalb in the American Continental Army. A month later, December the 7th, 1776, the Marquis de Lafayette became a major general in the American Continental Army. There was a problem. Transport. How were they going to get to America? Silas Deane said that he'd do the deed, but he couldn't come through. Most of the French officers thought they would simply board French vessels and sail to America. But there was a catch. Prime Minister Maurepas and King Louis did not want to provoke Lord Stormont, who was the English ambassador in Paris. Therefore, no French officer would be allowed to get aboard a French vessel, military vessel, and sail to America. In early February 1777, Lieutenant de Beaumartin, who had spent 11 years in the Navy before he transitioned into the Army, he was at his apartment at the Hotel d'Enghien whining. His older brother was there. Lieutenant de Beaumartin said he just didn't understand it. When he was back in the Navy, if they needed something, they'd just scrounge for it. They'd find a way. Besides, de Beaumartin said, if I had the money, I'd just buy a ship. We'd board it and we'd go to America. Why can't somebody rich? Why can't the Marquis de Lafayette just buy a boat and we'll board it and go to America? Here was contingency. There was an undistracted moment. And then de Beaumartin's older brother said, hold that thought. Said, no, more than that, write down that thought. I'll be right back. The older brother went out and buttonholed Lafayette, brought him back to the Hotel d'Enghien, and then told his younger brother, tell him what you told me. And Lieutenant de Beaumartin said, nobody notices me. I can go to Bordeaux. I'll find a boat. You front the cash. We'll board it and go to America. To which Lafayette replied, why not? Cour non. He put it on his coat of arms, and at future times, he said that whenever his resolve was flagging, he thought about his motto, or it also served as ready reply to his critics. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose. There is freedom in that space. That is where contingency lodges, an undistracted moment, and then choice. Here's the other feature. This is where philosophy works, in that space. Lafayette had three philosophies that permeated his life. There was a philosophy of worldview, a philosophy of personal view, and a philosophy of style. Let's review them. First, his philosophy of worldview. Here's what he said. True moderation consists not, as many people seem to think, in always seeking the middle between any 2 points, but in trying to recognize the point of truth and holding to it. The Jacobins at the beginning of the French Revolution thought France needed a constitutional republic. The monarchists thought that we needed an absolute monarchy and absolute rule. Lafayette didn't think that either was the answer. He thought that the French people at the time were perhaps insufficiently informed, possibly uninterested, maybe even temperamentally unsuited for a republic. On the other hand, he thought that absolute monarchy, that time had passed. He thought France needed a constitutional monarchy. Not far-fetched from what England had and what Jefferson recommended. But he felt that strongly. He felt that that was the truth. It happened to be middle ground, and he held fast to it, and it cost him. Second, his philosophy of personal view. Here's what he said. I have been reproached all my life for giving in too much to my hopeful disposition. I'll respond that it's the only way to do something out of the ordinary. One would indeed never try anything extraordinary if one despaired of success. In 1778, Washington, Lafayette, and 12,000 Continental soldiers were at Valley Forge. General William Howe was not far away in Philadelphia. Washington needed information. He needed to know what Howe was up to. He gave Lafayette that charge. Lafayette exited Valley Forge with 2,000 men, 600 Pennsylvania militia, and 47 Oneida Indians. On May 18th, he set up camp at Barron Hill. On the morning of May 20th, he was interviewing a young woman to recruit her to spy for him in Philadelphia. One of his aides came to him and told him that the British were approaching from his left. On the heels of that, another aide came saying the British were approaching from the front and the rear. The Schuylkill River was on his right. As it turned out, General Howe had brought 5,000 men, and Lafayette was surrounded. Here was contingency. Lafayette took an undistracted moment. He had 3 choices. He could surrender, he could attack, pitched battle, or he could escape. Lafayette discovered an embankment running right along the Schuylkill River. He took his 2,000 men and they scurried down that embankment across the Schuylkill and back to Valley Forge. A timely and handsome retreat, as Washington said. Lafayette escapes with a flare. And his third philosophy. This is his philosophy of style. Here's what he said. I read, I study, I examine, I listen, and I reflect. And out of all this, I try to form an idea into which I put as much common sense as I can. On Sunday, April the 20th, 1777, Lafayette weighed anchor aboard La Victoire and sailed out into the Atlantic from Las Paseas, Spain, headed for America. Answer me this. What was Lafayette doing in Las Paseas, Spain? Lafayette had purchased La Victoire at Bordeaux. 220 tons, 2 cannon, crew of 30, 112,000 livres, 40,000 down, the rest in June. Lafayette had first boarded La Victoire on March 25th. It was at the roadstead there at Pollack, there near Bordeaux on the Garonne River. Lafayette boarded it March 25th, 1777, weighed anchor, sailed down the Garonne River into the Atlantic, and then angled left down the coast of France, the coast of Spain, the Bay of Biscay, past San Sebastian, and then in the harbor at Las Paseas, and dropped anchor. And it was not until April the 20th that he then sailed for America. What was Lafayette doing between March 25th and April 17th? It was this philosophy of style. Lafayette's king had told him, no, don't go. What's more important, Lafayette's father-in-law, the Duc d'Anne, some said was more powerful and wealthier than the king himself. But his father-in-law said, you will not. And yet Lafayette felt that it was his purpose to go, but he needed to reconcile this difference. He thought it through, and he decided that his king had to say that he could not go. It was for public consumption. He had to put on this facade of neutrality, that the king really wanted him to go. And his father-in-law, everything that Lafayette had accomplished, he was a lieutenant in the army, he was then a captain in the army, it was all because of his father-in-law. Lafayette had the insight to know that he would never be respected, he would never gain the respect of his father-in-law unless he stood his ground and went to America. March 25th through April the 20th, Lafayette was reconciling. It was his philosophy of style. Let's talk about Lafayette's defining moment. Lafayette's defining moment was Tuesday, August the 8th, 1775. Lafayette was a captain in the French Army of the East. He was stationed at Metz. The commander was the Comte de Broglie. Prince William Henry was the younger brother of King George III. He was the Duke of Gloucester in Edinburgh, and Prince William was traveling the continent, ostensibly for his health. He was headed for Italy. Naples was a common vacation destination at the time. Truth be told, Prince William was not welcome at the court of St. James. First, he had married the illegitimate niece of Horace Walpole without the king's blessing. Second, and more important, Prince William disagreed with King George III's, with his brothers, policy toward the 13 colonies in North America. Prince William thought they deserved more freedom, and he was vocal about it. So King Louis permitted Prince William to review fortifications in France, and the Comte de Broglie invited Prince William to a banquet at Metz, to which junior officers were invited, and Lafayette was there. This is where Lafayette heard in earnest about these merchants and farmers fighting the British for their independence. It's where he heard about the Battle of Lexington and Concord, April the 19th, 1775. It's where he first heard about the First Continental Congress, September the 5th through October the 26th, 1774, and then a regrouping of the Second Continental Congress, May 10th, 1775. Lafayette thought it through, and he decided that this was his purpose, to fight with Americans in America for their independence. Lafayette's defining moment was August the 8th, 1775. Now, there will be those who argue that Lafayette was simply running away, that things were in a bad way back home. His domineering father-in-law was overly oppressive, and Lafayette wanted out. And some say that Lafayette, after all, was 17. This was just adolescent flailing. I want to argue that it was nothing of the sort. That in fact, Lafayette had established a trajectory from his formative years, and this was simply the end point of that. That because of those formative years, he was a searchlight looking for its object. And on August the 8th, 1775, he found it. What is true of history is true of all of us and was certainly true of Lafayette. We are the sum of our days. And I argue that that sum wound up at Metz, August the 8th, 1775. Let's examine, let's explore those formative years. And let's use a framework. Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist, and he developed a theory of cognitive development. And he said that there were 4 stages. Stage 1 was sensory motor, from birth to age 2. Stage 2 was pre-operational, from age 2 to age 7. Concrete operations, 7 to 11, and then formal operations, 11 to adult. Some adults never get through formal operations. Let's examine Lafayette in that way. So first, sensory motor. Sensory motor is from birth to age 2. This would have been the peekaboo stage. This is when Lafayette figured out that he had fingers and toes, and if we use a chess analogy, he would have fingered the pieces and maybe gnawed on them. He would have gummed them. Lafayette was born on September the 6th, 1757, in the region now known as Auvergne-Rhône Alps, 300 miles south of Paris, some 25 miles northeast of Le Puy-en-Velay. It was in the department of Haute-Loire. It was volcanic, mountainous, sparsely populated, forested. We are affected by our geography. He was born in the Château de Chevignac, an 18-room fortress built in the 14th century. It had 2 flanking towers, 4 floors. Lafayette was born in that right tower over there and the window just above the hedges. It had burned in 1701, the chateau had, and it was rebuilt without modification. Lafayette was baptized, a Roman Catholic, the day after he was born, in a chapel that is still there, close to Chevignac. His mother, Julie de la Rivière, was not there, too ill to come. His father, Roche Gilbert, was fighting the 7 Years' War. He was not there. His godfather, which was his grandfather on his mother's side, the Marquis de la Rivière, was not there. The Marquis was wealthy beyond measure because of Britain estates, and the Marquis was in Paris and simply could not abide a 300-mile trip for a baptism. He was not there. His aunt, Marguerite Madeleine du Motier, was not there. But his grandmother was. His grandmother on his father's side, Marie Catherine de Chevignac. She played an important role in Lafayette's life. And the one who baptized him was his cousin, although he referred to him as an uncle, the Abbé Murat. Lafayette had a lengthy name because his mother wanted to invoke all the blessings of the patrons. So Marie, Paul, Joseph, Yves, Gilbert, you know the rest, Dumotier. Lafayette had an uncontentious infancy, by all accounts, until August the 1st, 1757. His father, Roche Gilbert, was killed at the Battle of Minden, cut in half by an English cannonball. Interestingly, the commander of that artillery regiment was William Phillips, and Lafayette would encounter him again at Petersburg, Virginia in 1781. After his father died, his mother, Julie, decided to live in Paris and to leave her son at the Chateau de Chevignac with his grandmother and his aunts, Marguerite and Madeleine. She went to Paris because that's where her family was, but also to prepare a path for her son to come to court in Louis XV's court. Lafayette saw her only a few months at a time over the ensuing several years. We're through stage 1. Stage 2, age 2 to 7. This is when children learn language and when they are very self-centered. If we take the chess analogy, they would learn the names of the pieces and how they move. In October of 1759, after Lafayette was 2, his grandmother, Marie Catherine, petitioned King Louis XV for a pension for Lafayette. They were in financial straits. Back then, if you commanded a regiment, you were responsible for the costs of that regiment, the expenses of that regiment. Roche Gilbert had led 4 campaigns. The coffers were meager. Marie Catherine applied to the king for a pension, was granted 600 livres a year. She argued that unless she received that, the child's education would go wanting. When he was 4, in 1761, Lafayette's uncle, his mother's brother, died, which meant that Lafayette now was heir to the de la Riviere fortune. And when he was 4, his other aunt came to live with him, Louise Charlotte de Chavagnac. She had been married, her husband died. She had 1 child, Marie de Guerin. They came to live at Chavagnac when Lafayette was 4. Marie, his cousin, was 1 year older, and apparently they were very socially and temperamentally compatible. It was a great loss to Lafayette years later when she died in childbirth, in fact. This would have been the time that Lafayette would have heard the stories about the Marechal de Lafayette and the Battle of Orleans with Joan of Arc, 1428. He would have heard the stories about courage and his father at the Battle of Minden. This would have been the time when the idea of glory would have taken root. Laura Riccio, in her 2014 book, The Marquis, Lafayette Reconsidered, says that glory was divorced from any idea of splendor or celebrity or wealth, that a 1762 French dictionary defined it as reputation garnered through virtue and merit, great works and good qualities, and it was an end in itself. And this took root in Lafayette. In 1778, Lafayette told Washington that his one ambition was glory. It was service to community that would redound to him. This idea of glory was important to him. At the age of 5, he had a Jesuit tutor, but in 1762, Jesuits were outlawed in France. Madame Pompadour had something to do with that. So at age 7, his grandmother employed Abbe Féon, who was his tutor thereafter. Stage 2, age 2 to 7. We move to stage 3. So age 7 to 11, this is when young folks think they're invisible. It's when they learn induction, seeing the universe in a grain of sand, as Samuel Beckett and Chekhov said, and the grain of sand is me, it's the child. If we take the chess analogy, children would learn how things move, but they couldn't see the whole picture and they couldn't see consequence. They could understand that their queen could take the opponent's pawn, but then the opponent's pawn could take their queen. From 1764 to 1767, Lafayette was 8. The beast of the Gévaudan was marauding around the Auvergne. Nobody really saw it, but men, women, children, livestock were just being killed. It was said that it might be a wolf, it might be a lynx, disaffected Protestants, but had a mouth a foot wide and talons the length of a finger. Even the king got in on the act, sending his huntsmen and his hounds to try to find it. It never was found, but Lafayette remembered roaming the countryside, hoping that he would come face to face with the beast of the Gavudon, such that he could capture and subdue it in service to the Auvergne. He never came face to face, and it begged the question about how he was going to do the deeds. If you get a wolf by the ears, you dare not let go, but you dare not hold on. But Lafayette remembered wanting to meet it at the time. And Lafayette, in 1768, he was 10 years old, December of 1767, really. His mother decided it was time. Lafayette needed to move to Paris. He left Chevignac. He left Marguerite Madeline. He left Louise Charlotte. He left Marie Catherine and little Marie and went to Paris. It was seminal. He remembered on the journey that people didn't doff their hats to him anymore. And he knew that he was no longer the center of the universe. And when he got to Paris, he stayed at the Hotel Luxembourg. It was the Luxembourg Palace. It dwarfed Chevignac. It was one of the three architectural gems of Paris. Besides Luxembourg Palace, there was the Louvre, which is under construction, and the Tuileries Palace. And Paris was the second most populated metropolis in all Europe, next to London. 700,000 people. But what's more important, Paris was the epicenter of the Enlightenment. Some people say the Enlightenment began in 1637 with René Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Others, 1787, with Principia Mathematica and Sir Isaac Newton. Still others with the death of Louis XIV, the Sun King, in 1715, and then ended in 1789, the French Revolution. However you mark it, the Enlightenment was underway. It was the age of reason, the age of Voltaire and Rousseau. The scientific revolution with Francis Bacon had already begun. The Industrial Revolution was throttling up. The Romantic era was in its infancy, early throes. Really the high point, 1800 to 1850. And it's when we'd see Lord Byron and Robert Burns and even Alexander Dumas and Victor Hugo. This was the kettle in which Lafayette simmered. There was question of authority, the authority of the church and the authority of the monarchy. And this is what Lafayette moved into. So this was stage 3, concrete operations. From stage 3, we move into stage 4, formal operations. In 1768, the Comte de la Rivière, Lafayette's great-grandfather, took over Lafayette's education and enrolled him in the Collège du Plessis. The college was located right in between the Collège des Français and the Sorbonne, not far from Luxembourg Palace. Lafayette studied Latin, and he liked it. Furthermore, he was good at it, translating Latin into French, French into Latin, and he would compete at the college level and also at the university level. In fact, for years, he was rankled because he lost the university competition. He had been careless and he'd left out an entire line, and his judge had been harsh and counted off for every word. And Lafayette lost. He learned a valuable lesson. But consider the works that he translated. How could he help but absorb, solve, and drag what he was reading? He was reading Cicero's On Morals, Plutarch's sketches, Herodotus, and Virgil and Livy. Lafayette loved Latin. His hero, this is a fascinating thing. Lafayette's hero was Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix was a Gaul who lived near Auvergne. And Vercingetorix, which means greatest among the warriors, Vercingetorix unified the Gauls against the legions of Julius Caesar in 52 BC, and in fact defeated Caesar at the Battle of Gergovia in 52 BC. But Caesar came back with a vengeance in September of that same year at the Battle of Alesia, and Caesar won. Vercingetorix could see that his men were to be slaughtered. Vercingetorix dressed up in his finest regimentals, got on his horse, and rode into Caesar's camp alone. He gave himself up in order to save his men. Caesar took him prisoner, took him to Rome, and he was marched around the streets of Rome for 5 years and then strangled in 46 BC. Not far from Chevaniac in Clermont-Ferrand, there is a statue that was designed by Frederick Bertoldi of Vercingetorix. Bertoldi is better known for designing Liberty Enlightening the World, otherwise known as the Statue of Liberty. Lafayette also felt that one of his classmates had been unjustly punished, and Lafayette tried to rally his classmates in defense of their colleague. And Lafayette found out that sometimes that is easier said than done, and they would not come to his defense. And it was a lesson learned. Tragedy struck April 3rd, 1770. Lafayette was 12. His mother was not yet 33, and she died at Luxembourg Palace. And just a few weeks later, his grandfather, the Marquis de la Rivière, died. Some say out of grief. Lafayette now was an orphan for real, and he was also one of the wealthiest men in all of Europe. As consequence of inheritance, Lafayette now had an income that annually topped 100,000 livres, sometimes 130,000 livres. From the lands in the Auvergne, 18,000 livres a year. From his grandfather's lands in Brittany, 60,000 livres a year. And then when his great-grandfather died in 1781, another 17,000 livres a year. That, together with rents from properties in Paris and the East India Company, sometimes his income would top 130,000 livres a year. Lafayette was never defined by his wealth. He was never obsessed with it. He was interested in what it could accomplish and what it could achieve. And I would argue that that also permitted him to broaden the scope of his imagination. He didn't get control of those accounts until the age of majority, when he was 25. But fortunately, he had a very honest accountant who paid attention to detail, and that was Mr. Girard. On April the 9th, 1771, so almost a year later, when he was 13 years old, the Comte de la Rivière wanted Lafayette to start on a military career and therefore got him a position as a Black Musketeer. Before he'd retired in 1766, sometime back, the Comte de la Rivière had been captain lieutenant of the 2nd Company of the Black Musketeers, which was really a regimented bodyguard for the king. Lafayette's position was largely ceremonial. When his time came, it rotated, he would dress up in his finest. He would then ride from Paris to Versailles to ask King Louis XV if there were any orders. King Louis never had orders, and Lafayette would ride back. It was pleasant enough, and it was grand, dressing up in regimentals, and it was an excused absence. But Lafayette learned about the boredom of bureaucratic ritual. In the summer of 1772, he spent his last summer as a youngster at Chevaniac. His grandmother died in 1773, a year later. And when he returned in the fall of 1772, a cascade of events occurred. Here's the story. The Duc d'Enghien headed the Noailles family in Paris. The Duke was as powerful as the king, some say more powerful, and more wealthy. But the Duc d'Enghien had 5 children, 5 daughters, and he needed to find husbands for them. And he wanted those gentlemen to be independently wealthy, or else he would have to part with a hefty dowry. The Duc d'Enghien was aware of Lafayette, that he was single, and that he was wealthy. The Duc d'Enghien thought this was a go. This was a match. Lafayette was about 15 years old, and the second daughter, which would be the match, Adrienne, was not yet 13. The Duke proposed this to his wife, the Duchess. The Duchess was no wallflower. She stood up, tall as she could be, and said, "Not on your life. It will not happen." First of all, they haven't finished their education, which was important to her. And second, Lafayette is from the Auvergne. He's from the backwoods. This will not happen. It was contentious. For several months, the Duc d'Enghien was at Versailles, staying in the hotel there, and the Duchesse in Paris. And finally, the Duc d'Enghien hit on a compromise. What if they signed the agreements, but they delayed it for a year? And then, if there were any miscues, if Lafayette stepped out of line, it was done. It was over. The Duchess said she could tolerate that. That would work. On September the 21st, 1772, there was the preliminary agreement. In October of 1772, the tentative agreement. This is where they were staking each other out. Just how much were in their accounts, what were they worth? And this was difficult to determine for Lafayette because he had land in the Auvergne, he had rents and properties in Paris, he had land in the Breton estates. Finally, on February 15, 1773, the formal agreement was signed. They would be married in a year. Lafayette was aware of the agreement. Adrienne was not. Having signed the agreement, Lafayette now moved into the Hôtel de Noailles at Versailles. So under the roof where the Duchesse could watch her, he came in contact with Adrienne, but keep in mind that romance was no part of this. And he was also enrolled in the Academy of Versailles, so he could learn horseback riding, fencing, and dancing. Those were the things thought to be important on a battlefield. If you do those things well, then you could handle yourself on the battlefield. And Lafayette paid his own way. He brought his own servants. He paid 8,000 livres a year for the privilege of staying there under the watchful eye of the Duchesse. The Duc d'Enghien had no doubt but that what this was going to work. Therefore, on April the 7th, 1773, he arranged for Lafayette to become a lieutenant in the Noailles Dragoons, and Lafayette's military career was to start. Almost a year later, on March 26, 1774, Lafayette is presented at court. Very starchy affair, and he's not real comfortable. Lafayette does not have an outsized ego. He's 5'9" tall. He's got a sloping forehead, aquiline nose, blue-gray eyes, and really he's awkward and gangly. But he passes muster at court, at least. And on Monday, April 11, 1774, at 235 Saint-Honoré in Paris, Lafayette and Adrienne were married. The summer of 1774, Lafayette went to Metz. The commander there, the Comte de Broglie, with the Army of the East. Before he had left, however, on May 10th, 1774. King Louis XV was playing cards with his paramour, Madame du Barry, when he became violently ill. And subsequently, he broke out in pox. He had smallpox. It was a terrible, violent, excruciating death. And Lafayette was at Trianon Palace, and he witnessed it. On May 19th, not long after, the Duc d'Enghien, still trying to promote Lafayette's military career, arranged for Lafayette to become a captain in the French Army of the East. Lafayette then went on maneuvers up in Metz, the summer of 1774, but then he comes back and he does a very courageous thing. He rents a cottage in Chaillot, which is about 5 miles outside Paris. He, Adrienne, and the Duchesse go to the cottage. Lafayette has decided that he will get inoculated with one end. Now, this was before Edward Jenner's work on vaccination had been published in 1798. This was a courageous thing to do and a very forward thing to do. And Lafayette did that deed in the fall of 1774. Now, interestingly, the Duchesse had had a serious case of smallpox, and in fact, they thought she would die. And it is likely that Adrienne likely caught a small case of it, subclinical, but enough for her to become immune. 10% of the population in Europe was devastated every year by smallpox. And Edward Jenner came up with the first vaccine ever, and it was for smallpox, in fact. The summer of 1775 came around, and we're back to August the 8th, 1775. We have been through the 4 stages of cognitive development. Lawrence Kohlberg from the University of Chicago had a variation on that theme where he talked about moral development. And he said there was pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Pre-conventional is where you do it because you'll know you get in trouble. You'll be punished if you don't. Conventional is where you do it because everybody else does it. But post-conventional is where you do it because it's the right thing to do. And I would argue that Lafayette, even at this young age, demonstrates a post-conventional attitude. Let's talk about imagination. Northrop Frye, in 1957, wrote a book called The Anatomy of Criticism, which for the latter part of the 20th century was used for literary criticism. But he also wrote a lesser-known work in 1964 called The Educated Imagination. And he argued that on the one hand, we all have intellect. That is objective, nouns and adjectives. And on the other hand, we also have emotion. It's subjective, verbs and adverbs. And he said the thing that would weave the two together into one fabric was imagination. Recall that we have also talked about between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space, there is contingency, there are undistracted moments, there are choices. It's where philosophy works. But the power of philosophy is augmented by the depth of imagination. Northrop Frye said that it is the imagination that can help us see respect and reciprocity, that it's imagination that can help us value liberty, equality, and justice, that it's imagination that can help us appreciate courage on the one hand, which Aristotle says is the heart of all virtues. Cicero says it's gratitude. Fine. Courage and gratitude, the heart of character. I argue that Lafayette demonstrated a powerful imagination. First, his 3 philosophies in and of themselves. Second, his exposures, which would have broadened his imagination during his formative years. Consider them: the land, the people, the stories, the books. Importantly, Lafayette was a reader. And the debate. Lafayette would talk over issues. You really don't know exactly what your opinion is until you write it down. E.M. Forster said, "How do I know what I think until I see what I say?" And Lafayette became a letter writer. Until you have a blank sheet of paper in front of you and you put that opinion in words, opinion is unclear. Lafayette was a letter writer. Furthermore, Lafayette's behavior demonstrates imagination. His decision, August the 8th, 1775, number one. May 20th, 1778, the Battle of Barron Hill. Further, if we go to February 5th, 1783, Lafayette was at Cadiz, Spain. He was preparing for a Franco-Spanish invasion of England. But he had just heard that the Treaty of Paris was going to be signed, which would bring peace to North America. And he was writing a congratulatory letter to Washington. It was an 8-page missive. And in the middle of it, without any warning, he angles off and says, "By the way, what if we think about a project to emancipate slaves?" He asked Washington, "What if we bought land, we paid slaves for their work, we educated them, corporal punishment is outlawed, we don't even use the word slave and slavery, and then when they get their bearings, we free them?" Exactly 2 months later, Washington replied and said, "It's a laudable idea, we shall talk it over when we're together." In 1784, Lafayette went back to America. He arrived on August the 4th, and he was at Mount Vernon August the 17th and spent 11 days. Surely they talked about this project, which was so important to Lafayette, but no one was in the room where it happened. We don't know what was said. What we do know is in June of 1785, Lafayette authorized the purchase of land in Cayenne, French Guiana, South America, to pursue his passion. And not only did he sign authorization, but in December, that land was purchased and he pursued the project. I'd argue that Northrop Frye would find Lafayette's imagination wide scoped. Now, let's talk about Lafayette and LaGrange, Georgia. And we'll try to hustle. So Alex, I know we're behind schedule, I think, here just a little bit. So Lafayette and LaGrange, Georgia, let me tell you the story. So November 23rd, 1823, Lafayette is in the Chamber of Deputies, and he writes a letter to James Monroe. He says, "President Monroe, I'd love to come back to America to visit sometime. I'm too busy at the moment, but maybe occasion will present itself." Lafayette replies promptly on February the 7th, 1824. Lafayette says, "Congress has passed a resolution. Come on, tell us when you can come. We'll send a frigate to fetch you." Lafayette replies, "I'd love to come, but nothing doing. You're not paying my way. I'll pay my way," which was really something because Lafayette couldn't afford it. He had to borrow money and sell cattle, sell livestock in order to purchase passage aboard the Cadmus, which is a packet ship. He took off on July 13th and then landed on Staten Island, August 15th, 1824. It was the Sabbath. And rather than interrupt, he waited until Monday, August the 16th, and then he was the first to go down the Canyon of Heroes. And as Alan Hoffman has told us, there were more people there for Lafayette than showed up for the Beatles back in the 1960s. For 13 months, Lafayette went to all 24 states. He went to Wheeling, West Virginia, but it didn't become a state until 1863. And on March 19th, he was at Savannah. He traveled up the Savannah River to Augusta, then Warrenton, Sparta, then across the Oconee to Milledgeville. Governor George M. Troup, the 34th governor of Georgia, there to greet him, and then across to Macon, and then across what is now Chattahoochee County, much of it owned by Fort Benning. And on the 31st of March, crossed the Chattahoochee to Fort Mitchell. It may be apocryphal, But when Lafayette was coming across south of what is now Columbus and Chattahoochee County, he made comment, "This reminds me of my home, LaGrange." Standing next to him was Colonel Julius Caesar Alford. Alford heard the comment, and when it came time to name the county seat of Troup County in December of 1828, Alford suggested LaGrange. Troup County was incorporated in December of 1826. That is how LaGrange comes to be LaGrange. And in the center of town is Lafayette Square and a magnificent statue of the Marquis de Lafayette. It's a cast iron copy of the statue at Le Puy-en-Velay by Ernest Eugene Hill. And that statue in Lafayette Square was dedicated in 1976. And talking about imagination, get this. H.G. Henry was president of Lafayette, president of LaGrange College, liberal arts college right here in LaGrange from 1948 to 1978. And when Waits Henry came here, he wanted to know more about a town in west central Georgia named LaGrange and its connection to Lafayette. Waits Henry became a Lafayette scholar. And he thought that LaGrange needed a statue of Lafayette. It was the power and force of his personality and his imagination that got that cast iron copy through the bureaucracy of France, for which it's well known, and down in Lafayette Square, LaGrange, Georgia. What a grand story. Now, let me tell you about the Lafayette Alliance. The mission of the Lafayette Alliance is to inspire, to illuminate, and to unite, all in the spirit of Lafayette. Alex, can you put that photograph up? Let me ask you something. What do you see? And forgive the glare on the photograph. This is a photograph by Steve Hinch. He spends 9 months of the year out at Yellowstone. Janice and I were visiting Yellowstone one time. We walked into the visitor center and I angled off to the left, and up on the wall was this iconic, magnificent photograph, and it just stunned me. So these are bison. There are two types, the American bison and the European bison, and this is the American bison. 3,000 pounds, 7 feet tall, 12 feet long, and they can jump, despite those stubby feet, they can jump 6 feet straight up, and they can gallop 35 miles an hour. You remember that iconic scene in Dances with Wolves, 1990, where that youngster is frozen and a bison is charging. Bison are known to charge. People are hurt at Yellowstone because they're taking selfies in front of bison. So you see bison, but invoke the power of imagination. Imagination is an instrument, and when it's invoked, it's a procedure. I see determination. I see purpose. These are three who will not be distracted. And I see unity. Look at them in lockstep. What a grand photograph. Now, Lafayette, Alex, Lafayette next. Now let me ask you, what do you see? This is, of course, that iconic statue down in Lafayette Square here in LaGrange. And this is Lafayette in a uniform that he designed, holding in his right hand the cocarde, and we've anglicized that into cockade, the red, white, and blue cockade. Lafayette was looking for a unifying symbol, and he found it in the cockade that he raises high. We in the Lafayette Alliance think that Lafayette and this statue is a perfect brand for our community. And we want people to see Lafayette, but when they see Lafayette, we want them to identify with three things. Number one, what Professor Martha Nussbaum of the University of Chicago says are the two things on which democracy flourishes: respect and reciprocity. Number two, what Mortimer Adler, professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago, says are the three great ideas we act on: liberty, equality, and justice. And then finally, Aristotle says it's courage. Cicero says it's gratitude. Fine. courage and gratitude at the heart of character. We want people to see those things in this statue. How do we go about that? The story must be told. People need to know the narrative. There are 5 ways that you tell a story. You speak it, you sing it, you stage it, you craft it, or you write it. Start with theater. We need people to write the story. So it can be full-fledged theater, fine, but it need not be conventional theater. It could also be theater that we have out in community with a makeshift stage. Furthermore, it could also be sketches. Instead of an hour and a half, 20 or 30 minutes that you do for civic organizations, that you do for schools, or even pop-up presentations that you do at restaurants. Linda McMullen is working on that project, and it's an exciting one. Furthermore, we also need music, and we need crafts. We have talked about undistracted moments. We've talked about contingency. Let me ask you something. What would contingency look like if you held it in the palm of your hand? What would an undistracted moment feel like if you had it in your pocket? We need imagination and crafts. These are souvenirs, they're keepsakes. Furthermore, we need the figurines of Lafayette. Furthermore, we need a Lafayette chess set. And we need culinary imagination. Listen, somebody came up with the idea of State Diane. Diane is the Roman goddess of the hunt. Well, why didn't they just give it the name for the Greek goddess of the hunt? Artemis. Well, Steak Artemis just doesn't have the ring. We can come up with our own Lafayette LaGrange flambe. Bananas Foster, yet another example. So back in 1951, Owen Brennan comes up with this idea of bananas and ice cream and rum, and then set it on fire down there. And there you've got Bananas Foster. Richard Foster was the chair of the New Orleans Crime Commission in New Orleans at the time. Well, we don't have a crime commission, fine. We can have a Lafayette LaGrange Thornton flambe. Jim Thornton's our mayor here. It just takes imagination. This is a monumental work. What we're talking about is working toward a self-sustaining destination monument, to purloin a phrase from the National Monuments Association. People coming to see the statue, but then to see the story. And people would come, but this is a monumental work. We need people to come off the sidelines and off the benches and get in the game. Everybody, no matter what you do, at some point you feel like you're on an assembly line. This is opportunity to come off that assembly line and face a blank sheet of paper doing something that you've thought about, but just never committed to. To take an idea and infuse it on a blank sheet of paper and figure out a way to make it walk. To write theater, to write sketches, to write pop-ups, to write music. Think about it. Years ago, had Lin-Manuel Miranda said, I'm going to write a story about Alexander Hamilton, and it will be hip hop. We don't have a country and western Lafayette yet. We don't have a hip hop Lafayette yet. Gospel Lafayette, Broadway Lafayette. Why should we not? It takes the effort, it takes time. It takes sitting down on a quiet Saturday morning when it's still dark, hot cup of coffee, black, and coming up with an idea. This is a platform for deploying the imagination, and that's part of the effort. And this will require all elements of community. We've heard much about bridging the racial divide. Back in 1954, Gordon Allport, who was a Harvard sociology professor, he wrote a book called The Nature of Prejudice. He said that you overcome prejudice and you build trust by working together as equals, cooperatively, on a common project toward common good. This is that. We need all quadrants of community involved in this because it is a monumental work. This is the work of the Lafayette Alliance. Now, quickly, what item of attire best identifies with Lafayette? You're looking at it. So Lafayette did wear a cravat. That's true. That came in the 1660s whenever there were Croatian mercenaries to come up, and they had a fashion statement. They had this kerchief around their neck, and they called it a croat. Well, it was bowdlerized into cravats, and then that came to be bow tie. This is a Lafayette bow tie, and there are three types of bow ties. One is the clip-on, one's the pre-tied, and one is freestyle, where you tie your own bow tie. This is freestyle. Now, furthermore, this is social media. If you have time to talk and while away, you tie your bow tie such that it's broad and floppy. If, on the other hand, you're disciplined and there's work to be done, you make it disciplined and you make it tight and dense. There are also little icons on here. These are the icons of the Lafayette statue. They are upright. You can tie it such that they are upside down. If you do, either you weren't paying attention, you're trying to attract attention, or you're trying to see if your friends are paying attention. Lafayette wore a bow tie. If you look at Sully's photograph from Philadelphia, not photograph, painting from Philadelphia, Lafayette's wearing a cravat. If you look at Samuel F.B. Morris's portrait, take a magnifying glass down there. He's wearing a bow tie. But here's the catch. The iconic Ari Scheffer. Beam down on that. Lafayette has a bow tie in place. True, it takes some dexterity to tie the bow tie, but for an identifying mark to be identified with Lafayette, the Lafayette bow tie works. Now, quickly, what does a Lafayette enthusiast, male or female, what's a designation for a Lafayette enthusiast? Let's just review, take some possibilities quickly. We need something with style and something with standing. Here are the possibilities. A Fayettevillian, it has 5 syllables. There's a problem with this. Everyone would think that all Lafayette enthusiasts are from Fayetteville, North Carolina. So Hank Parfit, with all due respect, and the Lafayette Society, we would suffer the same psychological fate as Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot. Everybody thinks he's French. He's Belgian. How about a Fayettetophile? 4 syllables. It's like a bibliophile, which incidentally is of French origin, 1824. But it sounds too much like a card catalog. How about Lafayette-Alliance? Lafayette-Alliance. It's 5 syllables, like a Philhellene, one who loves all things Greek. You remember Ari Scheffer was a Philhellene. Lafayette-Alliance doesn't work. Sounds too much like a fuel for a blowtorch or a Bunsen burner. How about this? A Lafayetonian. 6 syllables. This works. It has verbal bulk. The diacritical marks are perfectly positioned, and it's a good title for a History Channel special, The Lafayetonians. And it fits musically. It'll fit country and western, rap, hip hop, Broadway, and like a bow tie, you've got to practice it a little bit, the onomatopoeia to it, but it works. It is a point like a bow tie of distinction. Now, finally, you remember we started with a question. What difference does it make? If we study Lafayette, can it make a difference in our social, our political, our moral attitudes? And the answer to that is yes. You've been very kind with your time and very patient. Alex, you're up.
Absolutely. So we're going to answer a few questions. We have a few comments and questions coming into the chat section, but if you even want to raise your hand, we'll acknowledge those, give you an opportunity to speak so we can hear you verbally as well. Dr. Ingram, we've got several things here. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful presentation. Alan Hoffman said, great presentation by the good doctor. And we have a question from Laura who says, where can links to Lafayette admiring the king and chieftain of the Arvinian tribe who united the Gauls be found? Links or photograph?
So I can tell you that number one, Wikipedia does have some information on Vercingetorix. There is a text on the Battle of Alesia that you can get. Amazon has that. And Plutarch, in his sketch on Caesar, talks about Vercingetorix. So Plutarch's Lives, which is available. Wikipedia does have an outline on Vercingetorix. And there is also a monologue that talks about the Battle of Alesia in 52 BC, and they talk about Vercingetorix. May I interrupt just very quickly? I told you that there would be some book recommendations. Alex, may I give these to you very quickly?
Go ahead.
So may I suggest, this is Laura Riccio, The Marquis, I'd recommend to you. This is Lloyd Kramer. I've read this book twice. I will read it the third time. I don't tell you that to impress you, except this book is worth the time to read and to read again. So it's not just a chronology of Lafayette's life, it is thematic. So it talks about women in his life, it talks about his priorities. This is worthwhile. Louis Gottschalk, 6 volumes. This is 3 of those 6, which is Lafayette in America. And this is not in print, but it's still available on the internet, and I'd recommend that to you. This is Paul Spaulding's book, and we'll be talking with him here in a couple months. So this is Prisoner of State Lafayette. This is well written, and what a grand story this is. Furthermore, Lafayette in America, Alan Hoffman. And it's worth the price of the book just to read the preface and how he came to want to write this. The story is worthwhile. I'd also recommend this to you. This is a true friend of the cause. Lafayette did talk with Washington about emancipation. Lafayette did start this project of emancipation down in Cayenne, which is quite a story. And this tells much of that. There are 3 or 4 essays, and they have 4 essays, I believe, and this is worthwhile. A true friend of the cause, and I recommend it to you. And this, Lafayette, Hero of Two Worlds. This is a grand 3 essays that are in here. It talks about the farewell tour, and it is just spectacular. Now, you'll probably be unable to see, but this is Ary Scheffer's portrait of Lafayette, and there he is in all his bow-tied glory right there. This is well worth it. Lafayette, Hero of Two Worlds. All right, Alex, sorry I interrupted.
No worries. We want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. If you want to hang around and ask questions, feel free to do that. If not, we don't want to hold you for the rest of your evening. So thank you again. And if you will, just visit us at LafayetteLaGrange.org. You can sign up for the other speaker series, the other lectures and speaker series that we have coming up this year. And you should see this video, this recording come up shortly. So we will go ahead and say thank you to everyone who came. But if you have any questions, feel free to still give us those. And I do have one question regarding the Bicentennial. Does the Lafayette Alliance and LaGrange, Georgia, intend to celebrate the farewell tour in a few years?
Listen, I'm so pleased that you answered that question. We have 2 plans. Number 1, the Bicentennial. So when it comes around, 2024, 2025, what we anticipate doing is to ask prophets and nonprofits alike to pursue their missions over the course of that year, but with a Lafayette link. So that means that our symphony, we would enjoy it very much. We would like to work with them with ideas. But since there's such a long lead time, we would like to ask them if they would consider, given their monumental talent, might they consider writing original works that have to do with Lafayette and then performing them during that year? So we have choral groups, we have the symphony, we have all sorts of talent here. Can we bring them to bear, pursuing their missions? Can we get the prophets out there to at least put some signage out telling some of the story? And again, the Lafayette Alliance, we can give them some of the narratives and some of the stories. So the answer to your question is yes, we are planning, and we would like to have a year-long celebration where we have a lot of involvement. Now, part 2, Chuck Schwalm and the American Friends of Lafayette, they are planning quite a magnificent year, and with events all over the country. And what we anticipate here in LaGrange is working with the AFL and with Chuck Schwalm and Alan to choose a day that works and then have some really focused activity here in LaGrange, Georgia, to celebrate Lafayette's farewell tour. And so all that in the works at the moment. So the answer to that question is yes.
Thank you. Well, we've dismissed everyone, but we still have a few questions coming in, so we want to make sure that we can answer those. Joe Thompson says, thank you, Dr. Ingram. Laura says, great, love the talk. And Evelyn Pless asks, how about designing board or card games based on the farewell tour?
You're invoking that power of imagination. So yes, we do need to have that done. We also, so card games we need, board games we need. We also need to think about ways that we can have Lafayette block festivals. So could we on a Saturday, for instance, invite families and children to come down where they play whack-a-mole or basketball around the world, and their score is augmented if they can ask a couple of Jeopardy questions on Lafayette. We have to get the design down. But to invite families to come down and to have a good time, but to learn Lafayette in the process. And part of that would be, yes, if you had board games. The other thing is if we thought about blitz chess. Do you know that there are rules for playing blitz chess? A game can be played in 2 minutes or less. Well, if we can link it to Lafayette, let's have a blitz chess competition. The answer is yes.
We had a comment there from Mackenzie Fowler. Phone cases or pop sockets are cheap ways to advertise Lafayette in a fashionable way. I'll have to make note of that, Dr. Ingram, for our next board meeting. Another question that we have is, what positive attributes of Lafayette resonate with you on a personal level? Or has inspired you in your own life?
Whenever I look at Lafayette, number one, you just look at the story and it's inspiring. The story itself. You start August 8, 1775, where he decides this is what I'll do. And then he does it. Now, furthermore, you remember we talked about that interval. I am impressed to no end at that interval, March 25th through April the 20th when he sailed, the angst that he must have gone through in order to come to a conclusion that he needed to sail. I think that's impressive. We talked at the top of the key about his 3 philosophies. I think those are spectacular. And to read those over, and there are 2 ways to read Lafayette. And this is similar for all literature, I might add. One is just to skim it. It's the 8-second soundbite. It's reading the headline. That's superficial reading. And that's a separate argument we could talk about what happens to children and their cerebral wiring when they spend a lot of time doing that. It does affect them. The other is deep reading, and it's where you have to engage. So when you read the first sentence of a novel and you ask, out of all the things the author could have written, why that first sentence? Now you're deep reading. Now you're engaging. So when I read about Lafayette, it's in the details. Yes, you and I know about Yorktown. That's true. Yes, we know that he was imprisoned at Olmutz. But let me ask you something. What did he read when he was in prison? We'll be talking about that with Paul Spaulding's book here. I'm impressed with that. And Lafayette was a reader. That impresses me to no end. And Lafayette, when he moved to LaGrange, having his library, and he would sit up next to that window watching the fields, but reading all the while. So yes, Lafayette does impress me. Yes, he inspires me. Yes, he illuminates. And is it relevant to me today? The answer is yes, it is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ingram. I think that is, we will call that the end of everything. We've answered all the questions that have come through. Thank you again for attending. We do hope to see you at one of our lectures coming up soon. Thank you all and have a great evening.